The public good of outward and common order in all reasonable society to the glory of God is the great and only end which those invested with magistracy can propose in a sole respect unto that office. This distinguishes their office from that of ministers of the gospel, which is versant about the disorders of men's hearts. But it does not surely mean that there is nothing incumbent on magistrates but the employment of physical force in restraining men from committing injuries, or in putting down riots and seditions. The prevention of crimes and disorders is a more important object than their punishment. A right to accomplish any end implies a right to use all the means that are necessary or conducive to the gaining of that end, and of all the means which are calculated to preserve order, to repress crimes, and to promote the public and general good of society. The most powerful beyond all reasonable doubt is religion. On this ground, it becomes one of the first duties of those who are entrusted with the care of the public weal of a nation to preserve and cherish a sense of religion on the minds of the people at large, and, for this purpose, to give public countenance and decided encouragement to its institutions. And the more pure and perfect, the more free from imposture, falsehood, error, superstition, and other corruptions, the more certain in its foundation, and the more forcible in its motives, that any system of religion is, the higher claims must it have to public countenance, both on the ground of its intrinsic truth and authority, and on account of its superior practical influence and utility. This is not to make religion an engine of state. It is to use it for one of those ends which is calculated in its own nature to serve, and which its author intended it should serve. It is to make the ordinances and the institutions of God mutually subservient, and thus to promote in a more extensive way his glory and the good of his creatures. Thus, as it is incumbent on all men to employ every lawful means in their several stations for advancing the true religion, the duty of the enlightened and patriotic magistrate, and the duty of the pious and public-spirited Christian who may hold that office, becomes so far coincident and a uniform manner of action, according to the complex character which the individual sustains, is produced. Magistracy is common to mankind at large, whether living within or without the Church. It supposes them capable of religion and practicing it in some shape under the moral government of God. But as it is founded on natural principles and on the moral laws, which was prior to the Christian faith and more extensively known, it would be absurd to suppose that it was instituted by the mediator, or that it has the supernatural things peculiar to Christianity for its direct and proper object. As the whole institution and end of the office are cut out by and lie within the compass of natural principles, it were absurd to suppose that there could or ought to be any exercise thereof towards its end, in the foresaid circumstances, but what can be argued for and defended from natural principles, as indeed there is nothing especially allotted and allowed to magistrates by the Word of God and the confessions of the Reformed churches, but what can be so. This establishes the power in question on its proper and broadest basis, as extending to natural religion, whether more imperfectly understood without revelation or more fully explained in the Bible. And then it is to be observed that religion and morality, in all the extent to which they were contained in the law of nature, are taken into the system of Christianity. There can be, no such thing as a distinct profession or practice of natural religion in Christian countries, and consequently there could be no objects of a religious kind in such countries about which magistratical power could be employed, unless it were to regard them as existing in the constitution of the Christian Church, and see to the observance of them as enforced by immediate divine authority, and connected with supernatural mysteries. To deny, therefore, that civil rulers have a right to do this, would be to represent the gospel as making void instead of establishing the law, and as invalidating that authority and abridging those powers which the God of nature had instituted and conferred for the wisest and most beneficial purposes. When duly and wisely employed about the external concernments of the Church, as a visible society erected in the world, so as to be really serviceable to her interests, civil authority becomes doubly a blessing to a people, and as such it was repeatedly promised to Christian nations in the prophetic scriptures both of the Old and New Testament. But in this case there is no addition of power to magistracy, but merely an application of its common power, under the direction of its original general law, to a particular object which is brought under its cognizance in some periods and places of the world. The kingdom of Christ, though not of, is in this world. As externally set up among men, it is entitled to all the support and countenance which any ordinance of God can give it, and as its spirituality does not render it incapable of being injured by the kingdoms of the world, so neither does it render it incapable of being benefited by them. Church and state are essentially distinct and independent of each other, but kingdoms and powers which are independent may surely maintain a friendly alliance. They may assist and support each other, and, although the one cannot make laws which are binding on the other, they may make laws which both tend and are intended for mutual advantage. Presbyterians have stated with as great clearness as those of any other denomination, I may safely say, with greater clearness, the divine origin, the independence, the spirituality, the heavenly constitution of the kingdom of Christ, and its distinction from secular kingdoms in its laws, administration, subjects, offices, judicatories, and special ends. But in perfect consistency with all this, they have maintained that civil and ecclesiastical societies may sustain friendly relations, that they may be helpful to each other, that they may have certain common objects, about which both may be employed in a distinct manner, and a common end beside that which is peculiar to each, that the cooperation of temporal and spiritual power may be necessary for introducing or securing a public reformation of religion when it is opposed by violence, or when a corrupt system has established itself in all the departments of society, and that civil authority, in ordinary times, may be exerted in securing and preserving the Church in the peaceable, full, and permanent enjoyment of her peculiar liberties, government, and institutions. A civil establishment of a particular religion or church does not necessarily imply a power of legislating to the faith and consciences of Christians, nor an imposing of matters purely religious or of supernatural things as such by civil penalties, nor a depriving of subjects of their natural and civil privileges simply on the ground of their descent. Besides, there are various ways in which religion may be an object of public attention, and be encouraged by those who are in civil authority, supreme and subordinate, without their attempting to establish a particular system which, in many cases, would be impracticable or highly improper, as when the mass of the people may be grossly ignorant of Christianity, or superstitiously attached to a corrupt form of it, or when a nation may be greatly divided in their religious opinions and practices. But it is not the design of these pages to enlarge on the subject. Before dismissing it, however, I have two general remarks to make. In the first place, it is, to say the least, extremely inadvertent to represent this as a subject of mere speculation, on which Christians are called to form no opinion. Not to specify here the various practical lights in which the question may be viewed, it may be sufficient to mention that national laws and their administration, whether in favor of a true or a false religion, have always had and must have great influence upon the opinions and conduct of the mass of the people. Religious establishments exist in our own country and are daily productive of good or evil. We must either approve or condemn them in whole, or we must do so in part. And how can we do either if we have no formed principles on the subject? In the second place, it is still more unreasonable to hold out that this is a matter of mere speculation to seceders. After the statement that has been given of their principles, after their express approbation of the national covenants, of the Westminster Confession, of the civil reformation of Scotland, and the laws establishing the Protestant and Presbyterian religion, after their condemnation of the rescission of these laws at the Restoration, after their pointed censures of the Revolution's settlement on such grounds as the following, that prelacy is never considered as contrary to the Word of God, nor our Presbyterian church government and discipline, as what the land is bound and obliged to maintain by the most solemn oaths and covenants, and all the legal securities given to this church in that covenanting period from 1638 to 1650 are overlooked and passed by. And after having made their testimony on these heads, the matter of a solemn vow and oath, it surely cannot be maintained that they have no immediate or practical interest in the doctrine which teaches that civil authority may be warrantably employed about matters of religion and relating to the Church. The truth is that this doctrine is not only necessarily implied in their religious profession, but it will be found running through the whole of it, so that it is impossible to separate the one from the other without disordering and taking in pieces the entire system. I do not mean by this that they must decide and be agreed upon all the questions that have been or may be stated on the subject. This would be absurd in reference to ecclesiastical power, and much more so as to civil.